My name is Avery, I'm 29, and the night my mother called me a failure over roasted salmon and a white tablecloth I couldn't afford to stain, I heard the clean click of a deadbolt inside my chest. The sound of a door I'd been pushing my whole life finally unlocking. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from and hit like and subscribe if someone you love ever taught you the wrong definition of enough. Because this is the story of how I took the one metric my mother used to measure my worth and made it mine, not from spite, but to prove to myself that leadership isn't a title, it's a repetition you keep when nobody's clapping. I live in Milwaukee above a laundromat that hums like a tired animal. And until last spring, I was running a shoestring operations consultancy out of a studio with a crooked window, color-coding Gantt charts for small manufacturers who make parts the world never names, eating midnight pierogies because the deli downstairs closes at 9, and trying to convince vendors twice my age that my spreadsheets were flashlights, not threats. My mother, Rebecca Hale, doesn't live above anything. She runs Hale Meridian Fulfillment, a mid-sized logistics company in a glass box west of downtown, 243 employees, 36 trucks, and a reputation she wears like a jeweled brooch, beautiful, sharp, and designed to draw blood if you get too close. On LinkedIn, she's CEO, strategist, closer. And in person, she's ironed, unsmiling, and allergic to problems that don't disappear with a calendar invite and somebody else's weekend. She didn't start the company, my grandfather did with 2 trucks and a handshake. But she scaled it, and in our house people were weighed by what they carried to her table. So when I brought her a contract I'd won on my own, 6 months with a plastics plant outside West Bend, she didn't see the work, she saw my thrift store coat and salt-burned shoes and asked, "Are you still freelancing?" Like the word had mold on it. That dinner, that salmon, she wiped her mouth with linen and delivered the verdict without cruelty, which somehow hurt more. "Avery, you're 29 and still tinkering. I raised you to aim higher. This isn't a life, it's a phase you should have outgrown. When you get serious, call me. I'll find you a real role. Until then, try not to embarrass yourself." I boxed the leftovers, walked home past lit offices and a bronze statue nobody reads the plaque for, and a sentence assembled in my head like clean code. "I am done asking to be invited." At dawn, I drank penny-tasting coffee and opened an email from a plant manager whose name I'd underlined 3 times in a conference booklet. The subject line: "We're missing SLAs." She ran vendor performance for a consumer goods company that used Hale Meridian for seasonal surge, and her patience was leaking like a slow puncture. "Avery, I saw your talk on line balance. Roots are rumors. Expedites mean tomorrow if lucky. Can you walk our floor and tell me what I'm not seeing?" I said yes, because yes built the thin bridge I was standing on. 12 hours later, hairnet, safety glasses, counting seconds pallets sat like dogs waiting by doors that didn't open. I watched good drivers with bad routes roll in with manifest sheets assembled like magic tricks that hate clocks. I kept asking why until a supervisor admitted the scheduling software hadn't been updated since 3 COOs ago, and dispatchers, temporary workarounds, had fossilized into fragile gospel. That night, I turned the mess into a 32-slide deck and a 14-day plan, won the implementation, and then everything I saw started singing the same song. Hale used to be sharp, now it was tired, not the people, the pipes between them. Processes grown brittle, permissions layered like old paint, software that groaned if you asked it for Tuesday. I traced problems back to boring corners where they hide. Old contracts negotiated when my hair was in pigtails, vendor terms that rewarded miles instead of outcomes, drivers treated like elastic, and a picture emerged. My mother's company was a beautiful building with century-old plumbing. The picture turned into a plan on a Tuesday night, laundromat oceaning beneath my floor, when a former Hale dispatcher named Tomas called because a cousin's friend heard. "The CEO's daughter is poking around," and he wanted me to know 2 things. Night shift was covering 2 routes with 1 truck and a prayer, and the bank had started calling. I wrote it down and dialed someone my mother would call a shark and I would call necessary ecosystem. A quiet investor named Julia Nguyen, who buys problems other people can't solve and turns them into operations steady enough to sleep on. I sent Julia my notes, deck, and worry. By morning, she said, "You're not crazy, you're early. Put on real shoes, we're going to walk that place." And under the pretense of me being a client rep and her my mentor, we toured Hale. I watched Julia watch the company, the dock manager's assistants checking watches more than tablets, HR smiling like an apology, my mother's assistant's eyes darting at simple questions. Companies talk if you shut up. Then the glass elevator sang its corporate jingle and my mother stepped out, perfect, difficult to look away from. "Avery," she said, warmth like a borrowed coat, "what a surprise, and to Julia, and you are?" "A friend," Julia said, calm. My mother's smile sharpened. "We're very busy," meaning go, that night in a 7-table pho shop with a 2018 calendar, Julia said, "They're over-leveraged, look at their leases. Lenders hate ghost inventory. If the bank is calling, covenants are tight. Your mother is good, but she's busy being right, she's missing the water rising around her ankles. If we move carefully and ethically and give the bank a path to protect their downside, we can acquire without breaking anyone." The plan we built wasn't a heist. It was a rescue with conditions. We formed North Lake Operations LLC, tedious on purpose, hired Hardwick, the lawyer whose eyebrows could cross-examine, and we didn't threaten, we offered. A quick close structure that settled vendor disputes, protected line-level jobs, swapped software without making exhausted humans sit through 100 hours of punishment, and gave the bank a story they could explain to a committee allergic to surprises. Before approaching the lender, we validated the bones. I sat with drivers at 4:30 a.m. while thermoses filled and texts went out to kids. I asked which routes died first in snow, which customers lied in RFPs, which forklifts needed prayer. Julia and I met the bank in a glass room where the coffee is good and pens are heavy. She did the math, I did the maps, Hardwick did the risk. "You're not in the business of headlines," Julia told Credit. "You're in the business of getting paid. Push a failing operator and you get an obituary, fund an operator with a plan and you get a performing asset. We'll be your operator." They didn't say yes, they said, "We'll be in touch," which is banker for maybe. While they thought, I met with the customers quietly bleeding, 3 manufacturers and a national retailer, and promised 2 things I could afford: transparency and a phone number that rings to a person. A plant manager with a warning bell voice said, "You're the first person from Hale who sat where I sit." And I said, "I'm not from Hale," and she smiled like that changed physics. When the bank called back, they didn't say deal, they said, "We're open to a managed transition if you satisfy the senior note and negotiate assumptions with the landlord and fleet vendor," which is juggle 6 chainsaws on ice. The most delicate step was telling my mother. I could have blindsided her at closing, Hardwick loves efficiency. But Julia said, "Surprises make enemies, invitations make decisions." So I invited my mother to the cafe where she taught me hot chocolate foam is a reward you earn. She arrived crisp as a blueprint and said, "Are you joining the real world?" I answered, "I'm making an offer on your company." And for one soft second I saw all her versions. The girl packing boxes in Grandpa's first warehouse, the woman negotiating bigger lines while I coughed with strep, the mother teaching me to walk in heels on carpet so I wouldn't fall in meetings. Then the CEO took over. "Cute, then no, then who put you up to this?" And I said the words that made it real. "The bank is open to a transition. We're funded. You're tired, Mom, the numbers show it. Let me carry this," and her eyes turned to knives. "You think you can do what I do?" "I think I can do what it needs," I said, "which starts with listening to people you've been too busy to hear." And she stood, "Some people believe altitude wins arguments," and said, "Get out of my way." And I said gently, "I'm already in the building." Lawyer's lawyer D. A week later, we sat across a walnut table under a painting no one looked at, and words like indemnify and escrow stacked into a bridge everyone could cross. My mother fought well-protected lieutenants, bristled at earnouts, insisted on founder emeritus dignity without control. I didn't take revenge in clauses, I took responsibility. Retention for dispatch, bonus metrics that reward on time /in full /safe /honest not miles. Vanity spend to 0 until the trucks ran like clocks. On closing day, the bank watched like a cat that's seen a vacuum. Hardwick leaned back like a man who'd nap with one eye open, and my mother signed steady as a metronome. She didn't look at me. She said softly, "Don't embarrass me." And I nodded because I understood. Don't ruin her story about the world where she built, and I wandered. I walked out with keys I couldn't feel and a responsibility that perched on my shoulder like a silent animal. At 5:15 the next morning, I was in the warehouse, steel-toed boots, hair yanked back, Julia in a parka 2 sizes too big because she hates cold, and we did the only thing that works. We told the truth. To the night crew clocking out, I said, "I'm Avery. We're changing how this place breathes. Your jobs are safe, your ideas are needed, your time is not disposable. If anyone says different, call me," and I wrote my number on the whiteboard so big people laughed until they realized I meant it. We rolled out change in chewable chunks. Week 1, route rationalization and a real-time dispatch dashboard that doesn't require a spreadsheet wizard. Week 2, overtime sanity and cross-training so vacations aren't amputations. Week 3, software swap with practice runs, snacks, and the premise that software fixes nothing unless humans believe it helps. I sat in break rooms learning who keeps band-aids, which dock door sticks in humidity, who coaxes stubborn forklifts. I took heat from supervisors tired of being sponges under a leaky roof. I said you're right more than anything else because they were. We called the customers we'd hurt and said we owe you. And when they asked how much, I put numbers on paper that made their lawyers inhale but not object. We cut showroom plants and used the money for truck maintenance because breakdowns aren't sexy, just expensive. One afternoon between a safety briefing and a bank call, my mother walked the floor like a queen checking a conquered province. She looked wrong in a high-vis vest, which is to say she looked human, and for a second I wanted to grab her hand and show her second shift's cartoon cape on the whiteboard, our on-time streak mascot. But she kept her eyes high and said, "Your reports are late," and I said, "We changed which numbers matter," and she said, "You'll learn," and I felt the last piece of me stop auditioning. Month 1 bled, as turnarounds do. Month 2 found rhythm, fuel burn down 7%, on time up from 83 to 94. Safety incidents down, driver turnover easing, Lewis the mechanic grinning when we funded his parts check station. The bank sent a note that wasn't congratulations but confidence. Proceed. And I slept, really slept for the first time since the salmon. Real stories don't end with ribbon cuttings and applause from people who never clap. At a board session to codify our guardrails, my mother in the emeritus chair asked if we were resuming legacy perks, skybox, car allowances that could fund a classroom, and I said, not until every bathroom door in this building closes. And someone laughed then coughed and something smelled momentarily burnt though nothing was. Afterward, in the marble corridor where light falls like a spotlight, my mother said, "You're small," aiming for a dent, and I said, "Small fits the budget and gets the job done." And her pity was worse than anger. I didn't convert her. I converted the work. Saturday, know your contract sessions with free coffee, childcare, and a translator. A tuition program for dockworkers' kids, 2 tech college classes and books, paid for by money we weren't burning on executive experiences. The plant manager who first called me now sits on our advisory council with a stipend that says we respect more than her time. Because ceremony matters, I invited my mother to an operations showcase. Executives show up on time for those words, and I didn't make it about me, I made it about the work. Lewis walked her through the parts station. Kendra from dispatch demoed the new dashboard like a news anchor who knows the teleprompter by heart. Giorgio, a driver with a laugh like a drum roll, told how a customer cried because their delivery arrived when we said it would and nobody had done that for 6 months. I watched my mother's cheek muscle flicker when Giorgio said he makes bedtime now because his route isn't a choose-your-own-adventure. Afterward, she stood close enough for winter sharp perfume and said, "You could have done this with me." And I said, "I tried," and she said, "You humiliated me." And I answered every apology I'd owed myself. "No, Mom, I relieved you," and the words stung. There's no final explosion, there's an accrual of boring days in the best way and a new feeling like I'm not standing in quicksand. I moved apartments not to prove anything, but because the laundromat's hours no longer matched my mornings. I kept my squeaky office chair because it sounds like the nights I built a life no one else believed in. Months later, a young dispatcher named Amya knocked and said, "My mom thinks I'm failing because I'm not a nurse like my cousin." And the world folded like a note from a past me to a present one, and I told her, "Everyone who moves freight is a cardiologist in another language. Keep the rhythm, the body lives." And she laughed and left, and I sat with this. The best revenge isn't a wound. It's a system that heals. The last time I saw my mother in the building, she stood beneath my grandfather's photo, hat in hand, grin bright, a sun-white coin behind him, and said to the air, "We did it." And I didn't correct her because history is shared even when love isn't. She turned, really looked at me and said, "Don't let them soften you," which is maybe the closest blessing I'll ever get. I won't. I know the difference now between being soft and being porous. I can be kind without leaking. If this found you mid-salmon with a smile stapled on while someone rehearsed a smaller story for your life, tell me where you're watching from, like and subscribe for more tight, suspense-driven stories about choosing the work over the noise. and share this with the person who needs to hear that failure is just a word owned by the wrong storyteller. I'm Avery. My mother called me a failure, and I bought her company not to watch her fall, but to build a place where other people can stand without permission. Where a truck leaves on time, a bathroom door closes, a kid hears a bedtime story, and the loudest thing in the room is the work working.